Drop the puck.
You gotta wait for the guys. He was ready to drop the puck.
Hockey customs are tough, Micah. I understand. On the bright side, this went better than the time my wife said she wanted a Cosby sweater, and I got her this. Welcome back to a very special NFL draft-ish episode of Odd Man Sports. I'm your host, Brandon Perna. And if you're wondering what makes this episode so special, well, I'll tell you. For one thing, I'm the only pundit bold enough to hand out my draft grades before the picks are announced. Okay, Chargers, you get a B. Steelers, B-. Titans, C. Okay, some other things besides my draft grades that I'll be handling this week. My take on Ben Simmons' sartorial choices, some insights into Steve Nash's life choices, and whether the new Rooney rule requires the Patriots to consider minority candidates before they draft their usual slot receiver. We've got Dinks and Dunks! Now the NBA playoffs are underway with multiple teams moving to the second round, including the Boston Celtics, who swept the Nets. Now despite rumors he might suit up, Nets forward Ben Simmons did not play due to what he said were mental health issues, a claim bolstered by batshit crazy outfits he wore to the games. Gee, I wonder where he got the idea to dress strange in an attempt to convince people he wasn't right in the head.
We're very sensitive to the emotional stress that athletes have to endure.
Rover, sit! Hut, hut!
During the Timberwolves-Grizzlies opening round series, multiple protesters interrupted the action, including on Sunday, when a fan leapt over the front row and onto the court before being expertly tackled by a security guard. In fact, the only way the security guard's tackle could have been any better is if Gus Johnson was calling it.
What a hit! You got barbecue back there, and you didn't invite me! Hurt my feelings!
Yeah, that is better. Now apparently the protesters were bringing attention to the fact that a chicken company run by Minnesota team owner Glenn Taylor had recently killed 5.3 million chickens that had contracted bird flu using a practice called ventilation shutdown, in which air to the chicken barn is slowly cut off. Which, I don't know, sounds pretty humane, coming from a guy who literally owns a team of wolves. I feel like it could have been a lot worse. Pat Beverly in a 2x4? No, let's just move on. In other NBA news, a former personal assistant to Richard Jefferson has been sentenced to prison after admitting to stealing up to $4.7 million from Jefferson over a 7-year period. Money that he spent on luxury cars, homes, vacations, and private school tuition for his children. Now, Jefferson told authorities he became suspicious when the assistant asked Jefferson to pick up his dry cleaning. Congrats are in order for golfer Dustin Johnson and his bride Paulina Gretzky, who were married over the weekend in Knoxville, Tennessee. For those who don't know, the union of DJ and the Great One's daughter is the classic love story of boy meets girl, boy and girl fall in love, boy proposes to girl, girl says yes, girl scrubs Instagram of any record of boy after persistent rumors of boy's infidelity, and 4 years later, boy and girl tie the knot. Ah, I love love. Money talks! The NFL draft begins Thursday night, and a huge congratulations to all the potential draft picks who made it this far without footage emerging of them ripping a bong hit through a gas mask. And as we lead up to draft day, I'd like to take a moment to dispense a few morsels of advice to the players preparing to graduate to the league. Tony, hit me with that good commencement speech music. Distinguished members of the NFL draft class of 2022, today I find myself in this privileged position to share some knowledge that I've learned over the years. My first piece of advice: you only have one chance to make a first impression. You may have heard this before, but do you know who didn't? Giants first round draft pick Kadarius Toney, who showed up to his first practice wearing one shoe, which is somehow way worse than showing up with no shoes. And 1 year later, despite the fact that he's maybe the team's most skilled player, the Giants are already shopping the guy for a second-round pick. First impressions matter. Piece of advice number 2, the NFL is a chance for a fresh start. If you want to ditch that childhood nickname you've hated your entire life, well, this is your chance. But do not do what Texans 2019 draft pick Titus Howard did and tell the Houston Chronicle that now that he was in the NFL, he was changing his nickname from Weenie to Hotlink, because I guarantee it will lead to some version of what actually happened. J.J. Watt responding to the article by saying, "We'll be sure to have a jersey with Weenie on it ready for you at first practice." And my third and final piece of advice for NFL draftees: be someone people like to work with. How do you do this? Well, don't punch them for starters, like Earl Thomas did to fellow safety Chuck Clark, which led to Thomas's contract being terminated by the Ravens. And don't flip them off like Earl Thomas did to Pete Carroll, which signaled the end of his Seahawks employment. Unless you run a 4-3, then you can do absolutely whatever the fuck you want. Odd man out. At the beginning of the 2021-22 NBA season, the Brooklyn Nets, under first-year head coach Steve Nash, were the odds-on favorites to win the NBA championship. Vegas apparently felt the sheer force of Brooklyn's star power with KD, Harden, and Kyrie would override any expected team turbulence, especially with the steady hand of Steve Nash on the controls. Well, that didn't happen, and we're all familiar with the reasons why. While many major questions surrounding this team remain, there is one in bright, blinking lights I'd love to have answered. Why the fuck is Steve Nash coaching this team? I'd like to know. This is how much money Steve Nash made in his career. $144 million. This is Steve Nash's wife, who he's been married to since 2016. This is a video of a dog licking Coach K's face, which is irrelevant to this story, but is just funny because the poor dog has absolutely no idea how much he's gonna get yelled at over the next 10 years. Back to Nash. Coaching is not something modern NBA stars do. Here's Mike D'Antoni, Nash's old Suns coach, putting a number on just how much of a headache head coaching in the NBA really is.
On the player side, coaching players, how much of that was managing egos versus X's and O's?
Probably 90% egos.
Nash's current salary is almost $9 million per year, which sounds pretty good. But in NBA terms, it's the same amount made by Thomas Bryant, Royce O'Neal, and Jakob Poeltl, none of whom I could tell you what team they play for. And for that princely sum, last year Nash had the pleasure of dealing with Kevin Durant, quite possibly the most sensitive player of his generation, James Harden, quite possibly the least self-aware athlete on the planet, Ben Simmons, quite possibly the most brittle athlete in American professional sports, and Kyrie, who somehow is the least likable of the bunch. Again, why the fuck is Steve Nash coaching this hellscape of a team? Why, Steve? Why? My guess, it probably has something to do with that same Teddy Roosevelt man in the arena speech that keeps Brady coming back year after year after year.
The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood.
Pretty inspiring for the man in his basement. But my advice to Nash is to take inspiration from an unlikely anti-hero, former teammate, Boris Diaw. Since retiring from basketball in 2018, Diaw has been sailing around the world, chasing the sun and finding adventures in the farthest reaches of the globe. And while Diaw lives the life we all dream about, Steve Nash is arguing about whether or not it's actually a fucking globe. All right, that's it for today. A reminder to head over to thegameday.com for all of your NBA playoff bets, because if a game is played and you didn't bet on it, did it really happen? Did it? That's a fair question. All right, enjoy the NFL draft, and we'll talk next week.